December 9th, 1940. The White House. Franklin Roosevelt sits in his study, a 4,000-word letter spread across his desk. His hands, weakened by polio, hold the pages steady. Outside, Washington sleeps. Inside, the President of the United States reads the most desperate plea ever sent by a British Prime Minister to an American leader. Winston Churchill has laid it all out. Britain is broke. The gold is gone. The dollar reserves are nearly exhausted. The ships carrying food and weapons across the Atlantic are being sunk faster than they can be replaced. And the Neutrality Acts, America's own laws, forbid the sale of weapons to any nation at war unless they pay cash and carry the goods away in their own ships. Britain can no longer pay cash. Britain has almost no ships left to carry anything. Roosevelt reads slowly. Churchill's prose, even in crisis, carries weight. The Prime Minister doesn't beg. He states facts. Britain has ordered weapons, aircraft, ships worth billions of dollars from American factories. Those orders are keeping American workers employed, American industry humming. But the moment Britain's money runs out, those orders stop. The factories close, the workers go home, and Britain falls. Roosevelt sets down the letter. He's known this was coming. The correspondence between them has been building toward this moment for months. Since May, when Churchill became Prime Minister and sent his first message signing himself, "0-, both men had served as naval ministers. In the previous war, the tone has grown steadily more urgent. But this letter is different. This letter puts a number on it. This letter says, we have weeks, maybe months. After that, we're done. The President picks up his telephone. He calls his advisors. He calls his speechwriters. He begins to work. The problem isn't what Roosevelt wants to do. He's been clear about that since the beginning. When France fell in June and Britain stood alone against Hitler, Roosevelt told his cabinet, "We must do everything possible to help the British." When Churchill asked for 50 old destroyers to protect convoys, Roosevelt found a way, trading the ships for bases in British territories, calling it a defense measure for America. The problem is the American people. In November, Roosevelt won re-election on a promise. He stood before crowds and declared, "Your boys are not going to be sent into any foreign wars." The applause was thunderous. The relief was palpable. Americans remembered the last war, the trenches, the gas, the boys who never came home. They wanted no part of Europe's new catastrophe. A poll in early December shows 88% of Americans oppose entering the war. They sympathize with Britain. They hate Hitler, but they don't want to fight. Roosevelt has to thread an impossible needle. He has to give Churchill everything he's asking for without appearing to give Churchill anything at all. He has to arm Britain without violating neutrality. He has to prepare America for war while promising peace. He has 8 weeks until his next inauguration. 8 weeks to change how Americans think about their role in the world. On December 17th, Roosevelt holds a press conference. He's been working on this for days, crafting the perfect analogy. The reporters crowd into the Oval Office, notebooks ready. They know something's coming. The President has been unusually quiet since the election. Roosevelt leans back in his chair. He speaks casually, as if the idea just occurred to him. Quote. He says, quote. 4. The reporters scribble. Roosevelt continues. Quote. It's brilliant, it's homespun, it's completely dishonest. Britain isn't borrowing a garden hose. Britain is asking for billions of dollars in weapons, ships, aircraft, ammunition, food. Britain is asking America to become the arsenal for a war America claims it isn't fighting. And everyone in that room knows Britain will never be able to pay it back. But the analogy works. It makes aid sound temporary, neighborly, safe. It makes opposition sound petty. What kind of person refuses to lend their neighbor a garden hose? The next day, newspapers across America run the story. The garden hose analogy spreads. Editorial writers pick it up. Ordinary Americans repeat it at dinner tables. Roosevelt has reframed the entire debate without seeming to debate anything at all. But he still needs Congress to change the law. On January 10, 1941, a bill is introduced in both houses of Congress. It's called H.R. 1776, the number chosen deliberately, invoking the founding, revolution, independence. The bill is titled, quote, 6. It doesn't mention Britain. It doesn't mention aid. It doesn't mention the war in Europe. What it does is give the president sweeping authority to sell, transfer title to, exchange, lease, lend, or otherwise dispose of any defense article to the government of any country whose defense the president deems vital to the defense of the United States. It's the most expansive grant of executive power in American history. It essentially allows Roosevelt to conduct foreign policy and wage economic warfare without congressional approval for each action. The isolationists see exactly what it is. Senator Burton Wheeler of Montana calls it, quote, 9 Charles Lindbergh, America's most famous aviator and most prominent isolationist, testifies before Congress that Britain is already defeated, that aid is pointless, that America should make peace with Hitler's new order. The debate consumes the nation for 2 months. In London, Churchill waits. The U-boats are winning. In January alone, they sink 126 ships. In February, 103 more. The convoys that do get through arrive with half their vessels missing. The ones that make it are often damaged, limping into port with wounded crews and partial cargoes. Britain's cities are burning. The blitz continues night after night. Civilians sleep in underground stations. Children are evacuated to the countryside. The RAF fights on, but aircraft production can't keep pace with losses, and the money is almost gone. On February 9th, Churchill gives a radio address. He's speaking to Britain, but he knows Roosevelt is listening. He knows America is listening. His voice, that unmistakable growl, comes through clear. We shall not fail or falter. We shall not weaken or tire. Neither the sudden shock of battle nor the long-drawn trials of vigilance and exertion will wear us down. Then he pivots. He addresses America directly without saying the name. Give us the tools and we will finish the job. 7 words. A promise and a plea. We'll do the fighting, we'll do the dying. Just give us the weapons. Roosevelt hears it. So does Congress. So does the American public. The phrase spreads like the garden hose analogy. It's repeated in newspapers, on radio programs, in congressional speeches. It reframes the debate again. This isn't about America fighting. This is about America manufacturing. This is about American workers, American factories, American prosperity. And Britain will do the actual dying. The Senate debates for weeks. Amendments are proposed, rejected, modified. The isolationists fight every clause. Senator Robert Taft warns that the bill gives Roosevelt power to carry on a kind of undeclared war all over the world. He's right. That's exactly what it does. But the interventionists have momentum. The fall of France is too recent. The newsreels of London burning are too vivid. The idea of Britain falling, of Hitler controlling all of Europe, of America facing the Nazi war machine alone, it's too terrifying. On March 8th, the Senate passes the Lend-Lease Act, 60-31. The House passes it 317-71. The margins are comfortable, but not overwhelming. A third of the Senate voted no, nearly a quarter of the House. On March 11th, 1941, Roosevelt signs it into law. The ceremony is brief. No grand speeches. No celebration. Roosevelt knows that half the country still opposes intervention. He knows he's committed America to a path that leads inevitably to war. But he also knows that without this, Britain falls. And if Britain falls, America faces Hitler alone. The first Lend-Lease shipments begin immediately. Weapons that Britain ordered and couldn't pay for are suddenly available again. Ships that sat in American ports, legally forbidden from sailing, are cleared for departure. Aircraft roll off assembly lines and are flown to Canada, then to Britain. The flow of aid becomes a flood. By the end of 1941, America will have sent over $1 billion in aid. By the end of the war, the total will exceed $50 billion, over $700 billion in today's money. Britain will receive $31 billion of that. The Soviet Union, after Hitler invades in June, will receive $11 billion. America has become the arsenal of democracy without declaring war. Roosevelt has found his way through the impossible needle. But the correspondence between Churchill and Roosevelt doesn't stop. If anything, it intensifies. The two men write constantly. Churchill sends updates on battles, requests for specific weapons, strategic assessments, personal observations. Roosevelt responds with commitments, questions, reassurances. They've never met in person. They've never shaken hands or shared a meal. But they're conducting a partnership that will determine the fate of the world. Churchill's messages are often written late at night after long days managing the war. He dictates to secretaries who type through the night. The messages are long, detailed, sometimes running thousands of words. Churchill can't help himself. He's a writer, a historian, a man who thinks through prose. Roosevelt's responses are shorter, more pragmatic. He's managing Congress, public opinion, his own military chiefs who want to build up American forces before committing to anything. He can't promise everything Churchill wants, but he promises what he can. The tone between them shifts after Lend-Lease. There's relief in Churchill's messages, gratitude, but also growing urgency about the next crisis and the next. The war isn't getting easier. Hitler invades the Soviet Union in June. Japan expands across Asia. The U-boats adapt to British countermeasures and sink even more ships. Churchill needs more. He always needs more. And Roosevelt, bound by American politics, by isolationist sentiment, by his own promises to keep American boys out of foreign wars, gives what he can while preparing for what he knows is coming. Because both men understand something the American public doesn't quite grasp yet. Lend-Lease isn't a way to avoid war. It's a way to prepare for it. It's a way to keep Britain alive until America is ready to fight. Roosevelt never says this publicly. He can't. The political cost would be catastrophic. But in his private correspondence with Churchill, in his conversations with his inner circle, it's clear. He knows where this leads. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor is still 9 months away. The official American entry into the war is still 9 months away. But the real entry, the economic and industrial commitment, the transformation of America into the arsenal that will overwhelm the Axis powers, that begins the moment Roosevelt signs Lend-Lease. Churchill understands this. In his memoirs, written after the war, he describes the Lend-Lease Act as, quote, 13. It's an unusual phrase, unsordid. But Churchill means it precisely. Nations don't typically arm other nations out of principle. They arm allies for strategic advantage, for payment, for territory, for influence. Roosevelt armed Britain knowing Britain couldn't pay, knowing the debt would never be fully repaid, knowing it committed America to a conflict most Americans still opposed. He did it because he believed Britain's survival was essential to American security. He did it because he believed democracy had to survive somewhere, even if America wasn't ready to fight for it yet. But he also did it because Churchill asked. Because the correspondence between them, the personal connection, the mutual respect between two men who understood power and history and the weight of their decisions. That mattered. Roosevelt never met Churchill before Lend-Lease. Their relationship existed entirely through letters and telegrams, through words on paper carried across the Atlantic by ship and plane. Yet those words built a partnership that would reshape the world. On March 12th, the day after Roosevelt signs Lend-Lease, Churchill receives the news in London. He's in his underground war rooms, the bunker complex beneath Whitehall where he directs Britain's defense. The telegram arrives. Churchill reads it. His staff watches him. They've seen him angry, defiant, exhausted, drunk, brilliant, impossible. They've never seen him cry. Churchill's eyes fill. He doesn't speak for a moment. Then he looks up at his private secretary, John Colville. "It's the end of the beginning," Churchill says quietly. He's wrong about that. It's not the end of the beginning. The war will last 4 more years. Britain will face more bombing, more losses, more desperate moments. The U-boats will nearly win the Battle of the Atlantic. The Desert War in North Africa will swing back and forth. The invasion of Europe is still 3 years away. But Churchill is right about what matters. Britain will survive. The factories in America will produce the weapons. The ships will sail. The aircraft will fly. And eventually, American soldiers will follow the weapons across the Atlantic. Roosevelt knows this too. When he signs Lend-Lease, he's not just giving Churchill the tools, he's committing America to the outcome. You can't arm one side in a war and pretend to be neutral. You can't become the arsenal of democracy and remain isolated from democracy's battles. The isolationists understand this. That's why they fight so hard against Lend-Lease. They know it's not about garden hoses. It's about choosing sides. It's about accepting that America's fate is tied to Europe's, that the Atlantic Ocean isn't wide enough to keep America safe from Hitler. Roosevelt has to pretend otherwise. He has to maintain the fiction of neutrality, of aid without involvement, of supporting Britain without fighting Britain's war. He has to keep that fiction alive for 9 more months, until Pearl Harbor makes it impossible to pretend anymore. But in his study, reading Churchill's letters, Roosevelt knows. He's known since that first desperate plea in December. Maybe he's known since Churchill became Prime Minister and sent that first message, signing himself former naval person, invoking their shared history, their shared understanding of naval power and global strategy. The correspondence between them is unique in history. 2 leaders conducting a war through letters before their nations are officially allied. 2 men building trust through words, through shared analysis, through mutual recognition of what's at stake. Roosevelt saves Churchill's letters. He files them carefully, marks them for his archives. He knows they're important. He knows historians will want to read them someday, to understand how this partnership formed, how these decisions were made. Churchill saves Roosevelt's responses. He'll use them after the war when writing his memoirs, quoting extensively from their correspondence to show how the alliance developed, how Roosevelt navigated American politics while supporting Britain's survival. But in the moment, in early 1941, they're just 2 men writing letters. One is desperate, his nation under siege, his cities burning, his people exhausted. The other is constrained, his nation divided, his political capital limited, his options narrow. And yet they find a way. Roosevelt reads Churchill's plea and finds the garden hose analogy. Churchill hears about Lend-Lease and gives his tools speech. The correspondence continues, the partnership deepens, the aid flows. Years later, after the war is won, after Hitler is dead and Germany is defeated, Churchill will write about those dark days of 1940 and 1941. He'll describe the loneliness of leading Britain alone against the Nazi war machine. He'll describe the fear that America would never join, that Britain would fall before help arrived. And he'll describe reading Roosevelt's messages, knowing that across the Atlantic, the President of the United States was working to find a way, was pushing against his own political constraints, was preparing America for a war most Americans didn't want to fight. Quote 18. Churchill will write. Quote 19. It's an understatement. In Roosevelt, Churchill found Britain's survival. In Churchill's desperate letters, Roosevelt found the argument he needed to transform American foreign policy. In their correspondence, both men found a partnership that would define the war. But it starts with that letter. December 8, 1940. Churchill laying out the facts. Britain is broke. Britain is alone. Britain needs help. And Roosevelt, reading those words in his study, beginning to work out how to give that help without breaking his promises, without losing his political support, without admitting what both men already know, that America is already in this war, just not officially yet. The garden hose analogy is genius because it's so obviously false. Nobody believes Britain is borrowing weapons and will return them after the war. Nobody believes Lend-Lease is a temporary measure, a neighborly gesture, a simple loan. But the analogy gives Americans permission to support aid without admitting they're supporting war. It gives Roosevelt cover to arm Britain without violating his campaign promises. It gives Churchill the tools without requiring him to explain how Britain will ever pay for them. It's a fiction that serves truth, a lie that enables survival. And it works because Roosevelt reads Churchill's letters and understands what's really being asked. Not just for weapons, not just for aid, for partnership, for commitment, for America to accept that Britain's war is America's war, even if America isn't ready to admit it yet. When Roosevelt signs Lend-Lease on March 11th, he's not just signing a bill. He's answering Churchill's letter. He's saying yes to the partnership. He's committing America to the outcome, even if most Americans don't realize it yet. Churchill understands this immediately. That's why he cries when he gets the news. Not from relief, though there's relief. Not from gratitude, though there's gratitude. But from recognition. Roosevelt has read the letters. Roosevelt has understood. Roosevelt is all in, as much as American politics allows him to be. The tools are coming. Britain will finish the job, with American weapons, American supplies, and eventually American soldiers.